"Look at you," Lieutenant Travis Mercer sneered as he ripped the framed business license off the wall and slammed it onto Adrian Cole's desk. A black businessman opens one decent little company and suddenly thinks he's too important to answer to the police. The glass exploded across the hardwood floor. Mercer kicked the license toward Adrian before grinding his polished boot over Adrian's name. Behind him, Detective Owen Pike shoved Adrian violently into a filing cabinet, rattling every award hanging on the wall. Pike laughed. "You people always think a little money changes who you are. Strip away the fancy office and you're still just another black guy who can be erased with one report." Several terrified employees watched in complete silence. Mercer grabbed a thick envelope stuffed with cash and forced it against Adrian's chest. "Take it," he said. "From now on, every camera your company installs works for us, not for your customers." Adrian calmly let the envelope fall onto the floor. "I don't sell people out." Mercer's expression turned cold. "You don't understand," he mocked. "Men wearing badges write history. Men like you spend years begging people to believe your side of it." He leaned so close their faces were inches apart. "And when we're done with you," Mercer whispered with a cruel smile, "every bank will reject you, every customer will abandon you, and nobody will remember your name, except as the black businessman who thought he could fight the police." Then came the final words. "You're finished." Neither officer noticed the tiny blue light blinking inside the smoke detector above the office door, silently recording every threat, every insult, and every second of the biggest mistake of their careers. If you believe the truth is worth fighting for, stay until the very end of this story. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and your local time in the comments. And if stories of courage, justice, and unforgettable reversals inspire you, subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. Good to have you here sometimes. The most beautiful part of a destination is the feeling of being welcomed by a stranger. 6 weeks before Lieutenant Travis Mercer stood inside Cole Secure Systems and promised to destroy Adrian Cole's life, Belhaven had looked like a city trying to convince itself it still had hope. The old factories along the river remained silent, their rusted smokestacks towering over neighborhoods where family-owned businesses struggled to survive. South Ridge was one of those neighborhoods. Small grocery stores, auto repair garages, barber shops, bakeries, and diners lined the streets, each owner working harder every year just to keep the lights on. Adrian had grown up there. He still remembered delivering groceries on his bicycle after school, watching his mother count every dollar before paying the rent, and listening to his father repeat the same lesson. "Money earns respect from some people," his father used to say. "Character earns respect from the right people." Those words stayed with Adrian long after his parents were gone. Now, at 43, he had built Cole Secure Systems into one of Ohio's fastest-growing private security technology companies. His engineers designed advanced surveillance systems, encrypted storage networks, and tamper-proof evidence servers for businesses across the Midwest. He could have expanded anywhere. Instead, he came home. "I don't understand," his chief financial officer had told him months earlier. "Southridge isn't profitable." Adrian had smiled. "It isn't supposed to be." The renovated brick warehouse that became Cole Secure Systems' Southridge Community Security Center stood only 4 blocks from the apartment where Adrian had spent his childhood. The center wasn't designed to make money. Every small business could receive discounted security cameras, emergency alarm systems, and digital evidence storage that automatically protected recordings from accidental deletion. Adrian believed every honest business owner deserved the same protection as a major corporation. Many people thanked him. Some warned him. The loudest warning came from Naomi Carter. The 62-year-old owner of Carter Family Market had known Adrian since he was a little boy, buying bread for his mother. She hugged him warmly during the grand opening, before her smile slowly disappeared. "Ah, you shouldn't have come back," she whispered. Adrian looked surprised. "I thought you'd be happy." "I am." She lowered her voice. "But good people don't stay good around here for long." Before Adrian could ask what she meant, the sound of police sirens echoed outside. 3 patrol vehicles rolled slowly past the market. Every customer inside suddenly became quiet. Nobody looked out the windows. Nobody smiled anymore. Adrian noticed something strange. Naomi quietly reached beneath her register, removed a plain white envelope, and slipped it underneath a stack of receipts. She caught Adrian watching. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Adrian asked gently, "Naomi, what's in the envelope?" Her hands froze. "Nothing you need to worry about." "I think it is." She looked toward the window again before answering. "Some bills are more expensive if you don't pay them." Before Adrian could respond, Marcus Reed walked into the store carrying 2 boxes of engine parts. Marcus had owned Reed Auto Garage for nearly 15 years. "She's talking about the police," Marcus said bluntly. Naomi shot him an anxious look. "Marcus." "No." He set the boxes down. "He's back now. He deserves the truth." Marcus turned toward Adrian. "You ever notice how certain businesses get inspected every month?" Adrian nodded. "You ever notice they never shut down the places selling stolen parts or drugs?" Adrian frowned. Marcus continued. "They only visit the people who refuse to cooperate." "Cooperate with what?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "They call it community partnership." Naomi quietly corrected him. "We call it survival." Adrian's expression hardened. Neither Marcus nor Naomi needed to explain further. The fear in their voices said enough. That afternoon, Adrian personally inspected several businesses that had recently installed Cole Secure Systems equipment. Nothing appeared unusual until he examined the security logs. Store after store showed the same impossible pattern. Entire blocks of surveillance footage had vanished. Not corrupted, not damaged. Removed with administrator-level authorization. The deletions always happened between 1 and 3 o'clock in the morning. Always. Adrian checked another system. Same pattern, another, exactly the same. His lead engineer frowned while studying the data. "This isn't hacking." "No." Adrian folded his arms. Someone already had access." That realization bothered him more than anything else. Only trusted administrators could erase recordings so completely. Someone with authority had been deleting evidence. That evening, Adrian quietly gathered his engineering team. "I want automatic cloud replication added to every South Ridge installation." One engineer looked confused. "Even if the customer doesn't request it, especially then." "What if someone objects?" Adrian looked toward the city skyline outside the conference room windows. "They won't know it's protecting them until they need it." The following morning, South Ridge celebrated the official ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new Community Security Center. Local reporters arrived. Business owners applauded. The mayor gave a short speech praising economic investment. Then several black SUVs stopped outside. Lieutenant Travis Mercer stepped out first. His uniform looked immaculate. His smile looked practiced. He shook hands with reporters before walking directly toward Adrian. "Mr. Cole." "Lieutenant." Mercer smiled broadly for every nearby camera. "Bellhaven appreciates successful businessmen investing in struggling neighborhoods." "So do I." Flashbulbs exploded around them. Mercer placed one hand on Adrian's shoulder like an old friend. "I hope your technology helps people feel safer." "I believe it will." Mercer's smile never faded. Just remember. His voice became almost too soft to hear. Safety around here depends on relationships. Adrian remained calm. I prefer contracts. Mercer chuckled. Contracts don't protect businesses. He squeezed Adrian's shoulder just a little harder. People do. Then he walked away, smiling for the cameras as though nothing unusual had happened. Marcus, who had watched everything from across the parking lot, slowly approached Adrian. What did he say? Adrian watched Mercer climb into his SUV. He welcomed me. Marcus sighed. No. He warned you. Late that night, Adrian sat alone inside the monitoring room, reviewing another series of missing recordings. One timeline stopped abruptly at 1:17 a.m., exactly 12 seconds before a police cruiser appeared outside the building. Another recording disappeared only moments before officers entered a convenience store during what official records described as a routine inspection. There were too many coincidences. He leaned back in his chair. Someone wasn't simply abusing authority. Someone was making sure nobody could ever prove it. And Adrian had just made himself the one man capable of preserving the evidence they had spent years erasing. The next morning, Adrian stood inside the monitoring room, staring at another row of missing video files. Every erased recording shared one detail. A police vehicle had been nearby just minutes before the footage disappeared. He leaned closer to the screen. Oh, someone isn't hiding mistakes, he murmured. They're hiding patterns. His lead engineer looked over his shoulder. You think it's one officer? Adrian slowly shook his head. No, it's organized. Instead of calling the police, Adrian drove to Reed Auto Garage. Marcus was replacing the transmission on an old pickup truck when two patrol cars rolled into the parking lot without warning. The customers immediately stepped back. Everyone recognized the officers. Detective Owen Pike climbed out first. Morning, Marcus. Marcus wiped the grease from his hands. What do you need? Pike smiled without warmth. A routine inspection. Marcus folded his arms. You've inspected my garage 3 times this month, and we'll inspect it a 4th. Without waiting for permission, Pike walked inside the garage while 2 officers began opening cabinets and toolboxes. A young mechanic whispered nervously, "Can they do this?" Marcus didn't answer. He already knew arguing only made things worse. One officer deliberately knocked an expensive diagnostic scanner onto the concrete floor. The machine shattered. Oops, the officer muttered with a grin. Pike turned toward Marcus. Looks like unsafe working conditions. Marcus clenched his fists. You broke it. Can you prove that? Before Marcus could answer, another familiar voice came from behind. I'd like to see the search warrant. Everyone turned. Adrian walked calmly into the garage. Pike laughed. The security salesman. I'm asking a legal question. Pike stepped closer. I'm wearing the badge. And I'm asking for the warrant. For several silent seconds, neither man moved. Then Pike pulled a folded document from his pocket and waved it carelessly. There. Adrian read only the first few lines before handing it back. This authorizes an inspection of hazardous chemicals. He slowly looked around the garage. So why are your officers searching customer invoices, financial records, and office computers? Pike's smile faded for only a moment. We investigate however we see fit. No, Adrian replied evenly. You investigate within the limits of the warrant. The mechanics exchanged surprised glances. Nobody had ever challenged Pike in public. Just then, a black SUV pulled into the lot. Lieutenant Travis Mercer stepped out, adjusting his gloves as if he had arrived to solve a misunderstanding. "Mr. Cole," Mercer said pleasantly, "always protecting someone. I protect evidence." Mercer smiled for everyone watching. "I admire successful people." His eyes hardened. But sometimes successful people forget their guests in this city. "I'm from this city," Mercer chuckled. "Then you should know how things work." He lowered his voice so only Adrian could hear. "Walk away while you still have contracts to lose." Adrian didn't move. "I don't negotiate with intimidation." Mercer's smile vanished almost instantly. For one brief second, the friendly public mask disappeared. Then it returned. "As you wish." He motioned toward his officers. "Finish the inspection." Nearly 40 minutes later, the police finally left. Nothing illegal had been found. But one security camera hanging near the entrance now dangled from a broken cable. Marcus looked at it in disbelief. They destroyed it. Adrian climbed a ladder and carefully removed the damaged unit. It wasn't an accident. He turned the camera over. The memory module had been removed. Marcus stared at him. They weren't looking for evidence. They were looking for recordings. That answer changed everything. Back at Cole Secure Systems, Adrian invited attorney Lena Brooks into the conference room. Lena had spent 15 years fighting civil rights cases across Ohio. She listened quietly while Adrian showed her the missing footage timeline. When he finished, she remained silent for nearly a minute. Finally, she asked one question. "How powerful is Travis Mercer?" Marcus answered before Adrian could. "Too powerful." Lena nodded. "I've seen complaints disappear before reaching court." She opened a folder filled with newspaper clippings. Businesses closed. Witnesses changed their stories. Evidence went missing. And every investigation somehow ended with Mercer receiving another commendation. Marcus frowned. So nobody can stop him." Lena looked directly at Adrian. "Someone can. But not without proof nobody can explain away." Adrian stood and walked toward a prototype server sitting against the wall. He rested one hand on the steel cabinet. "I've already started building that proof." Marcus looked confused. "What do you mean?" Adrian opened the cabinet, revealing a new storage unit, unlike any system his company had previously installed. "This server creates an encrypted copy of every recording within seconds. If someone deletes the original, the backup survives. If someone steals the camera, the backup survives. If someone destroys the building," Adrian allowed himself a faint smile, "the backup survives." Lena looked impressed. "You've already deployed these in every business that agreed to the upgrade." She studied him carefully. "Did you notify federal authorities?" Adrian hesitated. "Not yet." "Why?" "Because suspicion isn't enough." He closed the cabinet. "I need one undeniable moment." That evening, Adrian stopped by Naomi Carter's market before heading home. The store was nearly empty. Naomi quietly locked the front door after the last customer left. Without saying a word, she reached beneath the cash register and removed the same plain white envelope Adrian had seen days earlier. She placed it on the counter. "I've paid one every month for 4 years." Adrian stared at it. "Why didn't you report them?" Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "The last man who owned the pharmacy across the street." "What happened?" "They inspected him every week. They froze his permits. His suppliers stopped delivering. 6 months later, he lost everything. She pushed the envelope back under the register. I'm too old to start over. Adrian gently placed his hand over hers. You shouldn't have to buy the right to stay open. Naomi tried to smile. Then be careful. Because the moment they realize you won't pay. She never finished the sentence. As Adrian stepped outside, he noticed a plain white envelope tucked beneath the windshield wiper of his truck. Inside was a single unfired bullet. No fingerprints, no note. Only 5 words printed in black ink. Stop recording. Adrian looked slowly toward the dark street. Somewhere nearby. Someone was already watching him. Adrian didn't tell anyone about the bullet. He slipped the envelope into his briefcase, locked his office door, and stood alone inside the monitoring room long after midnight. The blinking screens reflected in the dark glass as dozens of live camera feeds streamed across the wall. Whoever had left that message knew 2 things. They knew he was recording, and they were afraid of what he might already have. The next morning, Adrian called every department manager into the conference room. I want every South Ridge installation upgraded today, he said. One of his engineers frowned. We're already working overtime. I know. Another manager looked uneasy. Is this because of the police? Adrian paused before answering. This is because evidence only matters if it survives. Within hours, technicians spread across South Ridge replacing ordinary storage units with encrypted backup systems that automatically transmitted recordings to secure off-site servers every few seconds. Each technician believed they were performing a routine software upgrade. Only Adrian knew the real purpose. If someone tried to erase the truth again, they would have to erase it everywhere. That afternoon, the phone on Adrian's desk rang. This is Adrian. A calm voice answered. Mr. Cole, Lieutenant Mercer would like to invite you to lunch. Adrian almost smiled. It doesn't sound like an invitation. It would be wise to accept. Exactly 1 hour later, Adrian walked into Bellhaven Grill, one of the city's most expensive restaurants. Lieutenant Travis Mercer was already waiting. The table overlooked the river. Crystal glasses, fresh flowers, soft piano music. Everything about the setting suggested a friendly business meeting. Everything about Mercer's eyes suggested otherwise. He stood and extended his hand. I'm glad you came. I wanted to hear what couldn't be said in public. Mercer laughed quietly. You learn fast. A waiter poured coffee before leaving them alone. For nearly a minute, Mercer talked about economic growth, neighborhood safety, and community partnerships. Then his smile slowly disappeared. I'll save us both some time. He slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were several contracts. I've reviewed them. Adrian looked up. Several of your largest clients rely on city permits. He nodded. They do. Mercer folded his hands. They'd hate to lose those permits. Silence settled between them. What do you want? Adrian finally asked. Mercer's answer came without hesitation. Stop installing cameras in South Ridge. No. Chiki, give my department unrestricted access to every recording your company stores. No. Pay a monthly consulting fee. Adrian almost laughed. You mean protection money? Mercer didn't bother denying it. I mean cooperation. He slowly stirred his coffee. Everybody benefits. Adrian pushed the folder back across the table. My customers trust me. They'll never know. I'll know. Mercer's jaw tightened. The lieutenant picked up Adrian's largest pending contract from the folder. a $4.8 million expansion with a regional grocery chain. Without taking his eyes off Adrian, Mercer dipped the corner of the contract into his coffee before dropping it onto the table. Dark liquid spread across the pages. "A shame," Mercer said softly. "Successful people sometimes confuse money with influence." Adrian calmly lifted the soaked contract. "You've made your point." "No." Mercer leaned forward. "I haven't." His voice became cold. "Why you think your little technology company gives you leverage? It gives honest people protection." Mercer smiled again. "It gives you the illusion of protection." He stood. "Think carefully. Because once I decide you're a problem..." He straightened his uniform. "Every door in this city closes." Mercer walked away without looking back. Adrian remained seated until the lieutenant disappeared. Only then did he quietly remove a small recorder from inside his jacket pocket. He stopped the recording. It wasn't enough. Mercer had threatened him, but he hadn't crossed the legal line completely. Not yet. Back at Cole Secure Systems, Adrian walked directly into the secure server room. He unlocked a reinforced cabinet containing the newest prototype his engineers had developed. Unlike previous systems, this version could not simply back up video. It also detected unauthorized attempts to disconnect, overwrite, or tamper with cameras. Every interference automatically created an encrypted duplicate and transmitted it through multiple independent channels. His chief engineer watched him activate the feature. This system wasn't scheduled for release. It is now. If someone notices, they're supposed to. The engineer stared at him. "You want them to attack it." Adrian slowly nodded. "I want them to believe they're winning." Late that afternoon, attorney Lena Brooks arrived carrying a thick case file. "I've been checking court records." She spread several documents across the conference table. 3 business owners filed complaints against Mercer over the past 8 years. What happened? Every complaint disappeared. Witnesses, they withdrew. Evidence, missing. Lena took a slow breath. "And there's something else." She placed another folder in front of Adrian. "Muchatam." A prosecutor's office employee accessed sealed complaint files dozens of times without authorization. "You know who? Not yet. But someone inside the courthouse is feeding Mercer information." Marcus, who had been listening quietly, slammed his fist onto the table. "So we're fighting the police and the prosecutor," Lena answered honestly. "We're fighting a network." Silence filled the room. Finally, Adrian looked toward the wall of monitors. "Then we stop chasing pieces. We make the entire network expose itself." Marcus frowned. "How?" Adrian smiled for the first time that day. "We give Mercer exactly what he wants." Neither Marcus nor Lena understood, but Adrian had already made his decision. He would let Mercer believe fear was working. He would continue upgrading cameras openly. He would stop hiding that his systems stored evidence. And sooner or later, Mercer would come personally to force Adrian into submission. That was the moment Adrian needed, because threats spoken behind closed doors could be denied. Threats spoken directly into a tamper-proof recording system could end careers. Outside the office windows, thunder rolled across Bellhaven as dark clouds gathered over the city. Somewhere beyond the rain, Travis Mercer was already preparing his next move. Neither man realized they were walking toward the same confrontation. One intended to destroy a life. The other intended to preserve the truth forever. The raid came exactly 8 days after Adrian's lunch with Travis Mercer. At 5:42 on a gray Tuesday morning, the first police SUV rolled into the parking lot of Cole Secure Systems. By 5:45, there were 6. Employees arriving for work froze as uniformed officers surrounded the building. Yellow evidence tape stretched across the entrance before anyone had been allowed inside. Marcus Reed, who had stopped by to drop off coffee for Adrian, watched in disbelief. "What are they doing?" No one answered. Lieutenant Mercer stepped out of his SUV with practiced confidence, while television news crews hurried toward the scene. Adrian immediately understood. The reporters hadn't arrived by accident. Someone had invited them. Mercer adjusted his tie before facing the cameras. "This morning," he announced, "the Bellhaven Police Department is executing a lawful search warrant as part of an ongoing investigation involving financial fraud, illegal surveillance, and the theft of confidential business information." Gasps spread through the growing crowd. Employees looked at Adrian, waiting for him to defend himself. Instead, he remained perfectly calm. "So may I see the warrant?" he asked. Mercer handed it over with a satisfied smile. Adrian read every page carefully. The warrant authorized officers to seize financial records and computer equipment related to alleged fraud. Nothing more. He looked up. "I'll cooperate." Mercer almost looked disappointed. "I knew you would." Detective Owen Pike didn't wait for instructions. The moment officers entered the lobby, he deliberately knocked over the reception desk, sending framed photographs crashing across the floor. A young receptionist cried out, "Please, those are personal evidence." Pike interrupted coldly. He swept computer monitors from their stands. Glass shattered. Hard drives bounced across the polished floor. Another officer ripped open filing cabinets and dumped contracts into muddy footprints. "This isn't necessary," one employee protested. Pike pointed a finger directly at him. "Say another word, and I'll charge you with interfering in an investigation." Silence returned instantly. Adrian watched everything. He noticed what the officers ignored. None of them were interested in accounting files. They walked directly toward the secure server room, exactly where the recordings were stored. Mercer quietly followed Adrian's eyes. Then he smiled. "You finally understand." Adrian said nothing. Inside the server room, Pike ordered 2 officers to disconnect every storage unit. One technician whispered nervously, "Sir, these systems contain customer security records." Pike grabbed the man by his shirt. "They belong to the police now." Adrian stepped forward. "Don't touch my employee." Pike released the technician and turned toward Adrian instead. With a sharp movement, he snapped handcuffs around Adrian's wrists. The metallic click echoed through the silent room. Several employees gasped. Pike shoved Adrian against the wall. "You've been acting like some genius entrepreneur." He tightened one cuff until Adrian winced. "Today you're just another suspect." Mercer slowly approached. "You could have avoided all this." "I didn't commit a crime." "No." Mercer smiled. "You committed something much worse." He leaned close. "You embarrassed the wrong people." Outside reporters filmed every second as officers escorted Adrian through the front entrance in handcuffs. Camera flashes exploded. Microphones pushed toward his face. "Mr. Cole, did you steal customer information? Are you involved in money laundering? Did your company illegally spy on local businesses?" Adrian answered none of them. Across the parking lot, Marcus tried to reach him. "This is a setup." 2 officers immediately blocked his path. "Stand back." Marcus pointed toward Mercer. "You know he's innocent." Mercer turned toward the cameras with a calm expression. "We appreciate everyone's patience while the facts are collected." His performance was flawless. To the public, he looked like a professional officer simply doing his duty. Only Adrian could see the satisfaction hidden behind the lieutenant's polite smile. Inside the interrogation room an hour later, Mercer placed a folder on the steel table. One password. Adrian remained silent. The server password. No. Mercer's expression darkened. You've built an impressive company. Stu, he slowly opened the folder. It would be unfortunate if everything disappeared today. It already belongs to my customers. Mercer slammed the folder shut. It belongs to whoever controls the investigation. Still, Adrian refused to answer. Mercer nodded toward Pike. Without warning, Pike swept every document off the interrogation table. Contracts, engineering notes, customer agreements, and family photographs scattered across the floor. One picture landed face up. It showed Adrian standing beside his late wife Elise on the day Cole Secure Systems officially opened. Pike stepped on the photograph without looking down. Mercer stared at Adrian. Pick them up. Adrian didn't move. I said. Mercer's voice became ice cold. Pick them up. Slowly, Adrian bent to collect the papers. As he reached for Elise's photograph, Mercer spoke loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. That's where you belong. On your knees. For a brief moment, anger flashed across Adrian's face. Then it disappeared. He quietly gathered every document without another word. Mercer mistook silence for surrender. He had no idea Adrian's watch had quietly marked the exact time of every threat inside the interrogation room. Hours later, attorney Lena Brooks finally arrived after repeatedly being denied access to her client. She immediately challenged the legality of the detention. After reviewing procedural errors in the warrant, a judge ordered Adrian released pending further investigation. Mercer couldn't stop him from walking out, but he could still damage everything Adrian had built. By the time Adrian returned to Cole Secure Systems that evening, several major clients had already suspended their contracts. His company's primary bank had frozen its operating accounts. Employees stood inside the darkened office wondering whether they would still have jobs by the end of the week. No one spoke. Adrian slowly looked toward the monitoring wall. One server indicator wasn't responding. The encrypted backup containing the recording of Mercer's threat had suddenly disappeared from the network. For the first time since this fight began, Adrian wasn't sure whether the truth had survived, or whether Mercer had finally found it. The following morning, Adrian walked into an office that no longer sounded like a growing company. The phones had stopped ringing. The reception area, once filled with clients discussing new security projects, sat almost empty. Only the low hum of computer servers broke the silence. His operations manager hurried toward him with a tablet in her shaking hands. We lost 12 contracts overnight. Adrian took the tablet. The list kept scrolling. Restaurants, medical clinics, warehouses, apartment complexes, nearly all of them had suspended their agreements. Not because they believed Adrian was guilty, because they were afraid. They said they can't risk being investigated, she whispered. Adrian nodded quietly. I understand. You understand. They're trying to protect their families. Before either of them could continue, another employee rushed into the lobby. The news is on. Every television inside the office suddenly switched to the same live press conference. Lieutenant Travis Mercer stood behind a police podium surrounded by officers in full uniform. Behind him, large photographs of evidence filled the screen. Our investigation, Mercer announced confidently, has uncovered financial irregularities that suggest Cole Secure Systems may have been illegally collecting private surveillance data from local businesses. A reporter raised her hand. Lieutenant Mercer, are you saying Mr. Adrian Cole sold customer information? We're following the evidence wherever it leads. Another reporter spoke. Does this involve organized crime? Mercer paused just long enough. We're not ruling anything out. That single sentence spread across television broadcasts within minutes. By lunchtime, social media had already declared Adrian guilty. His inbox filled with cancellation notices. Several longtime customers didn't even wait for an explanation. One simply wrote, "We can't be associated with your company anymore." Adrian closed the email without responding. Across town, another victim was paying the price. Marcus Reed stood inside Reed Auto Garage as half a dozen officers surrounded his property. Detective Owen Pike held a clipboard, while another officer carried a sealed evidence box. Marcus frowned. What now? Pike smiled. We received information that stolen automotive parts are being stored here. Marcus laughed in disbelief. That's ridiculous. It'll only take a few minutes. Instead, the search lasted 4 hours. Customers watched officers dismantle tool cabinets. Engines were pulled apart. Invoices scattered across the floor. Near closing time, Pike suddenly shouted, "I found something!" He reached beneath a workbench and held up a box containing several expensive electronic modules. Marcus stared at it. "I've never seen those before." Pike shrugged. "Tell it to the judge." Marcus was arrested before sunset. When Adrian heard the news, he immediately drove to the county jail. Marcus looked exhausted. "They planted it." "I know. They wanted me because of you." Adrian remained silent. Marcus leaned closer through the glass. "If this keeps happening, they're going to destroy everyone around you." Those words stayed with Adrian long after he left. That evening, he drove alone to Greenwood Memorial Cemetery. The sky had already begun turning orange as he stopped beside Elisa's grave. Fresh flowers rested against the headstone. He knelt quietly. "I thought I was protecting people." The wind moved gently through the trees. "They're suffering because they stood beside me." For several minutes, he simply stared at the engraved stone. Then he remembered something Elise had once told him during the earliest days of the company. "If the truth ever costs us everything, make sure it costs them their lives too." Adrian closed his eyes. "I'm trying." Behind him, footsteps approached softly. It was Lena Brooks. She had known exactly where to find him. Without speaking, she placed a folder beside the flowers. "I traced the complaint records." Adrian looked up. "And there were 7 business owners before you. 7. They all accused Mercer of extortion. What happened? Their cases disappeared." Adrian wasn't surprised. Lena took a slow breath. "But I discovered something else." She opened the folder. Every missing complaint passed through the same assistant prosecutor. She pointed toward one name, Paul Grayson. "So Mercer has someone inside the prosecutor's office." "I believe so." Adrian studied the documents. "If we expose Grayson too early, he warns Mercer." They both understood. The network was larger than either of them had imagined. The next morning, reporters crowded outside the courthouse, expecting Lena to file motions challenging Adrian's arrest. Instead, she stepped before the cameras and delivered a statement no one expected. After reviewing the available evidence, Lena announced calmly, "I am withdrawing as counsel for Mr. Adrian Cole." Microphones shot toward her. "Are you abandoning your client?" "I have no further comment." Across town, Mercer watched the broadcast from his office. A slow grin spread across his face. "I told you," he said to Pike. "Pressure always breaks them." Pike laughed. Even his lawyer knows he's finished. Neither man realized Lena had already anticipated that reaction. Less than an hour after the press conference, she quietly entered the prosecutor's office carrying 3 sealed folders. Inside were carefully selected documents. Not enough to expose Adrian, just enough to reveal who would secretly leak information to Mercer. It was bait. If Mercer reacted to details contained only inside those folders, they would know exactly where the leak existed. Late that afternoon, Adrian returned to his truck after visiting another former client. Something white rested beneath the windshield wiper. This time it wasn't a bullet. It was a folded piece of paper. Only one sentence had been handwritten. "The evidence room logs are false." There was no signature. As Adrian unfolded the note completely, a small metal object dropped into his hand. A locker key, stamped with one number, 319. He looked around the crowded parking lot. Hundreds of people walked past without slowing down. Someone had risked everything to leave that message. Someone inside the police department. And for the first time since this battle began. Adrian realized he wasn't fighting alone. Adrian turned the small brass key over in his palm. Stamped into its surface was a single number. 317. Whoever had slipped the note beneath his windshield wiper knew exactly what they were risking. If Mercer discovered there was a leak inside the department, that officer's career and perhaps life would be over. Adrian didn't go to the police station immediately. Instead, he drove to Lena's office. She examined the key carefully. "You think it's real?" "I think someone wants Mercer exposed." Lena looked at the handwritten note again. "The evidence room logs are false." She slowly nodded. "If that's true, every piece of evidence Mercer has presented could be compromised. Or manufactured." Before either of them could continue, Adrian's phone rang. "Marcus." His voice sounded exhausted. "They're shutting me down." "What happened?" "The city just posted a closure notice on my garage." "I'm on my way." 20 minutes later, Adrian stood outside Reed Auto Garage. A bright orange notice had been nailed to the front door. Business closed by order of the City of Bellhaven workers were already loading Marcus's equipment onto a city truck. Marcus argued with 2 officials. "Why, you don't even have a final court order." One inspector shrugged. "We're acting under emergency authority." Adrian stepped forward. "Show me the authorization." The inspector hesitated. Before he could answer, another familiar SUV stopped across the street. Lieutenant Travis Mercer climbed out wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy afternoon. He smiled as though he had arrived to congratulate an old friend. "Mr. Cole." Adrian faced him. "This is retaliation." Mercer slowly removed his sunglasses. "No. This is what happens when businesses lose public trust." Marcus pointed toward the workers carrying away his tools. "You know I'm innocent." Mercer looked at him without emotion. "Innocence doesn't pay city expenses." Adrian took one step closer. "Leave him out of this." Mercer smiled. "You still don't understand." He lowered his voice. "This isn't about your company anymore." He pointed toward the garage. "It's about teaching everyone else what happens when they stand beside you." Adrian held Mercer's gaze. "You'll run out of people to threaten," Mercer chuckled. "I only need to ruin a few." Then he walked away, leaving Marcus staring helplessly as years of work disappeared onto government trucks. That evening, another's victim found the courage to fight back. Naomi Carter called Adrian. Her voice trembled. "I've made my decision," 30 minutes later, Adrian and Lena sat inside Naomi's darkened grocery store after closing time. Naomi placed 4 old white envelopes on the counter. I kept every payment receipt. Lena's eyes widened. You documented everything. I thought maybe… Naomi swallowed hard. One day, someone honest would ask. Inside each envelope were handwritten dates, payment amounts, and initials identifying the officer who collected the money. Most of the initials belonged to Mercer, some belonged to Pike. Adrian carefully photographed every page. We'll protect these. Naomi shook her head. No. You don't understand. A tear rolled down her cheek. They already know I talked to you. Before Adrian could answer, crash, the front window exploded inward. Glass rained across the grocery store. Customers screamed from outside. A brick rolled across the floor. Wrapped around it was a note. Keep your mouth shut. Naomi froze. Lena immediately called 911. Ironically, the first patrol car to arrive belonged to Detective Owen Pike. He stepped inside, glanced at the broken window, then casually picked up the brick. Looks like neighborhood vandalism. Naomi stared at him. It happened less than 2 minutes ago. Pike shrugged. Kids. Adrian pointed toward the threatening note. What about that, Pike folded it once before slipping it into his pocket. We'll log it. You just contaminated evidence. Pike smiled. Are you giving police procedures now? Adrian stepped forward. That note belongs in an evidence bag. It belongs wherever I say it belongs. For a brief second, it looked as though Adrian might finally lose his temper. Instead, he quietly took one step back. Pike laughed. That's better. After the officers left, Lena turned toward Adrian. He destroyed the chain of custody on purpose. I know. And he knows we know. The following morning, Adrian decided to use the key. He parked 3 blocks from the police department and entered through the public lobby. At precisely 8:17 a.m., he reached the old storage lockers reserved for retired case files. Locker 317 opened with a soft metallic click. Inside sat a small flash drive and a folded sheet of paper. Nothing else. Adrian slipped both into his jacket without opening them. He didn't notice Officer Caleb Dunn watching from the second-floor hallway. Their eyes met for barely a second. Caleb gave the smallest possible nod before walking away. Adrian understood. The anonymous ally had finally revealed himself, but someone else had noticed the exchange. Upstairs behind the blinds of his office, Travis Mercer lowered a pair of binoculars. He couldn't hear what had happened. He hadn't seen the flash drive, but he had seen enough. He slowly reached for the phone. Pike. What is it? Find out what Officer Caleb Dunn has been doing. A long silence followed. Then Mercer added 4 words that sent a chill through the room. And bring him in. For the first time, Adrian's hidden ally was no longer just risking his badge. He was risking his life. Adrian didn't leave the police department immediately. He drove straight to an abandoned warehouse owned by Cole Secure Systems on the edge of Bellhaven, where Lena Brooks was already waiting. Without saying a word, he placed the flash drive from locker 317 onto the table. Lena inserted it into an isolated laptop. The screen filled with police inventory records, evidence room logs, search warrants, officer sign-in sheets. Then another folder appeared. Body cam, archive internal. Lena opened it. Her eyes widened. My God. Dozens of body camera recordings had never been submitted into evidence. Some showed officers entering businesses before official warrants had been issued. Others showed Pike carrying sealed evidence bags into buildings before discovering them during searches. One video froze both of them. Marcus's garage. The timestamp was nearly 20 minutes before the official raid. Pike could clearly be seen placing the electronic control modules beneath the workbench. Then he looked directly into his own body camera. Now they'll find exactly what we need. Lena covered her mouth. This destroys their entire case. Adrian remained calm. No, he paused. It destroys every case they've fabricated. Before they could continue, Adrian's encrypted phone vibrated. A single text message. They're questioning Caleb. Don't contact him. No sender. No number. Adrian immediately deleted this message. He doesn't have much time, he said quietly. Meanwhile, inside Belhaven Police Headquarters, Officer Caleb Dunn sat across from Travis Mercer. Mercer slowly slid a thin folder across the desk. Inside were photographs. Caleb meeting Adrian outside the courthouse. Caleb walking near locker 317. Caleb speaking briefly with Naomi Carter. Mercer folded his hands. Interesting friendships. Caleb forced himself to remain calm. I patrol South Ridge. I meet lots of people. Mercer leaned back. I'll ask once. Did you give Adrian Cole anything? No. Mercer smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. He nodded toward Pike. Without warning, Pike slammed Caleb against the wall. A framed commendation crashed onto the floor. You think you're smarter than us, Pike shouted. Caleb struggled to breathe. I haven't done anything. Pike grabbed him by the uniform collar. That's your last chance. Caleb looked directly at Mercer. You don't want the truth. You want obedience. The room fell silent. Mercer's smile disappeared. He dismissed Pike with a slight wave. Leave us. When the door closed, Mercer slowly walked toward Caleb. I've built this department for almost 20 years. He stopped inches away. Men have disappeared for less than betrayal. Caleb answered quietly. My father owned Carter Hardware. Mercer's eyes narrowed. You remember him. I remember you. Caleb's voice remained steady. I remember watching your officers inspect his store every week until he lost everything. Mercer stared at him for several long seconds. Then he finally understood. This was never about Adrian. Caleb shook his head. No. It started long before him. Mercer slowly smiled again. A pity. He pressed the intercom. Internal Affairs. After a brief pause, he continued. Officer Caleb Dunn is suspended pending investigation for misconduct. 2 officers entered. They removed Caleb's badge, his firearm, his identification. As they escorted him away, Mercer spoke one final sentence. You should have stayed loyal. Across town, Adrian was making another decision. We're not releasing the body camera footage. Lena looked stunned. Why? Because Mercer still thinks he controls the board. She stared at him. You want him confident. I want him desperate. Adrian pointed toward another encrypted folder on the flash drive. Look. Inside were copies of evidence room access logs. Nearly every fabricated case connected to one assistant prosecutor. Paul Grayson. Lena slowly nodded. So I was right. Yes, but exposing Grayson now only warns Mercer. Adrian closed the laptop. We need the entire network. That evening, Belhaven City Hall announced a public administrative hearing. Cole Secure Systems' operating license would be reviewed before city officials, local media, and community leaders. Mercer couldn't hide his satisfaction during the televised announcement. This hearing, he told reporters, will finally allow the public to see the facts. Adrian watched from his office television. Marcus walked in carrying the closure notice from his garage. They're putting you on trial. No. Adrian switched off the television. They're putting themselves on trial. Marcus frowned. What makes you so sure? Instead of answering, Adrian opened a secure cabinet hidden behind the server racks. Inside sat a compact black device no larger than a briefcase. Marcus had never seen it before. This, Adrian said quietly, isn't a server. It's the federal prototype. Marcus looked confused. The one you've been protecting. Adrian nodded. The recordings Mercer destroyed were never stored here. Marcus slowly realized what that meant. The server they seized was only a decoy. A faint smile crossed Adrian's face. Every second Mercer threatened me. Every illegal order, every fabricated search, every deleted recording. They've all been transmitted somewhere he can't reach. Before Marcus could ask where someone knocked softly on the office door, Adrian opened it. Standing outside was a woman in a dark navy suit. She held up a federal identification wallet for only a second before slipping it back into her pocket. Mr. Cole, my name is Rachel Monroe. I'm ready. Adrian nodded as though he had been expecting her. Marcus stared in complete confusion. Rachel stepped inside and quietly closed the door. The operation ends tomorrow. She looked directly at Adrian. But before we move, I need Mercer to say just a few more things in public. Belhaven City Hall had never been so crowded. Every seat inside the council chamber was filled an hour before the hearing began. Business owners from South Ridge stood shoulder to shoulder with reporters, city officials, and curious residents who wanted to witness the public downfall of Adrian Cole. Outside, satellite news trucks lined the street. Inside, cameras pointed toward a single table. Adrian sat alone. His dark suit was simple, his expression unreadable. Across the room, Lieutenant Travis Mercer entered with Detective Owen Pike and Assistant Prosecutor Paul Grayson, walking only a few steps behind him. Mercer smiled as flashes from dozens of cameras filled the chamber. To everyone watching, he looked like the hero who had uncovered corruption. Only Adrian noticed Rachel Monroe quietly taking a seat in the last row of the audience. She wore no badge. No one paid attention to her. That was exactly how she wanted it. The chairman struck the gavel. This administrative hearing is now in session. Paul Grayson stood first. For weeks, he began confidently. Evidence collected by the Belhaven Police Department has demonstrated that Cole Secure Systems illegally collected private surveillance data, manipulated digital evidence, and engaged in financial misconduct. Large photographs appeared on the projection screen. The staged cache discovered during the raid. Computer equipment removed from Adrian's office. The edited surveillance clip showing Adrian handing what appeared to be money toward Detective Pike. Whispers spread across the audience. Several reporters were already typing headlines. Grayson turned toward Adrian. Mr. Cole, would you like to explain why every piece of evidence points toward your guilt? Adrian rose slowly. I'd like to begin with a question. The chairman nodded. Proceed. Adrian looked directly at Mercer. Lieutenant Mercer, were you present inside my office on the evening of March 18th? Mercer answered without hesitation. Yes. Did you tell me my company would be destroyed? Mercer smiled confidently. I warned you that criminal activity has consequences. So that's your testimony? It is. Adrian nodded once. And during the search of my office, he continued, did your officers recover every recording device belonging to Cole Secure Systems? Mercer almost laughed. We recovered every relevant device. So nothing was overlooked. Nothing. Rachel Monroe quietly glanced at her watch. Adrian looked toward the chairman. I'd like permission to present evidence. Granted. He removed a small encrypted drive from his pocket and handed it to the city technician. Mercer leaned comfortably back in his chair. He had already destroyed Adrian's servers. Whatever remained couldn't possibly matter. The projection screen flickered. Then the first video began. It showed Adrian's office exactly as it had appeared on the night Mercer delivered his threat. Every camera angle, crystal clear audio. Mercer's own voice filled the silent chamber. Take the money. Every camera your company installs belongs to us. You're finished. The room became completely still. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Then the recording continued. Mercer's boot grinding Adrian's business license beneath his foot. Pike forcing Adrian against the filing cabinet. Mercer's voice again. By tomorrow morning, every bank will reject you. Every customer will abandon you. She will erase everything you've built. A reporter quietly lowered her notebook. Another slowly lifted his camera again. This time, not toward Adrian, toward Mercer. The lieutenant's confident smile disappeared. That's fabricated, he snapped. The video has been manipulated. Adrian calmly looked at the technician. Play file 2. A second recording appeared. Marcus Reed's garage, time-stamped 22 minutes before the official search warrant was executed. Detective Owen Pike entered carrying a sealed evidence box. He knelt beside the workbench, removed several electronic control modules, placed them underneath, then looked directly into his own body camera. Now they'll find exactly what we need. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Marcus lowered his head. For the first time in weeks, he smiled. Paul Grayson suddenly stood. I object. There's no verified chain of custody. Adrian answered before the chairman could respond. You're correct. He looked directly at Grayson. So let's discuss chain of custody. Play file 3. The screen changed again. This time it displayed internal police evidence logs, access records, digital signatures, timestamps. Every alteration highlighted in red. Then another document appeared. The login history of Assistant Prosecutor Paul Grayson. Unauthorized access, sealed complaint files, witness statements, evidence inventories. Every confidential file Mercer had needed passed through Grayson's account. Paul's face drained of color. That's impossible. Adrian calmly replied, your password never lied. The council chamber erupted into chaos. Council members began speaking over one another. Reporters rushed toward the front. Mercer slammed both hands against the table. None of this proves anything. Adrian turned toward him one last time. No! He nodded toward the technician. To play the final recording. The screen went black. Then an audio file began. Mercer's unmistakable voice echoed through the speakers. Delete every backup. If the originals disappear, nobody can prove what happened. Another voice asked, what about Cole? Mercer answered without hesitation. We'll make him look like the criminal. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable silence. Mercer slowly looked around the chamber. No one would meet his eyes. Not even Pike. At that exact moment, Rachel Monroe stood. She walked calmly down the center aisle. Only when she reached the front did she remove her federal credentials. The room immediately fell silent again. "My name is Special Agent Rachel Monroe. I'm with the Federal Public Corruption Task Force." She looked directly at Mercer. "For the record, every recording presented today was automatically transmitted to a federally secured evidence repository the moment it was created." She held up an arrest warrant. "The server your officers destroyed was only a decoy." Mercer's face turned completely pale. Rachel continued. "For the past 6 weeks, Mr. Adrian Cole has been cooperating with an active federal investigation into public corruption, evidence tampering, extortion, and civil rights violations." Mercer staggered backward. "No." Rachel didn't raise her voice. "It's over." The rear doors of the council chamber burst open. Federal agents entered from both sides. Within seconds, Mercer, Pike, and Paul Grayson found themselves surrounded. Mercer looked desperately toward the city officials who had praised him only hours earlier. No one spoke. No one came to help. As federal agents secured handcuffs around his wrists, Mercer locked eyes with Adrian one final time. Weeks earlier, he had whispered, "You're finished." Adrian calmly returned the same steady look. "You were right, Lieutenant. Someone's career ended today. It just wasn't mine." The flash of cameras became almost blunt as the man who had spent years destroying innocent lives was led out of City Hall in handcuffs. While the truth he tried so desperately to erase played on every television screen across Belhaven, the image of Lieutenant Travis Mercer being led out of Belhaven City Hall in federal handcuffs spread across the country before sunset. For years, the people of Belhaven had watched innocent business owners walk out of court in shame. Now they watched the man who had orchestrated that fear lower his head as cameras followed every step. No one applauded. No one celebrated loudly. Justice was too important to be treated like entertainment. Inside the council chamber, Special Agent Rachel Monroe addressed the stunned audience. "This investigation is ongoing," she announced. "Evidence recovered through Mr. Adrian Cole's encrypted security system has connected multiple public officials to a long-term pattern of extortion, evidence tampering, civil rights violations, and conspiracy." Federal agents escorted Paul Grayson out moments after Mercer. Detective Owen Pike tried to pull away from the handcuffs. "I was following orders." Rachel looked at him calmly. "The law doesn't disappear because someone above you gave the command." Pike lowered his head. For the first time in years, he had nothing left to say. Within 48 hours, search warrants were executed across Belhaven. Hidden bank accounts were uncovered. Cash payments from frightened business owners matched Naomi Carter's handwritten records almost perfectly. Every envelope she had quietly saved for 4 years became another piece of evidence. Several city officials resigned before investigators even questioned them. Others were suspended. The police department itself was placed under temporary federal oversight, while investigators reviewed nearly 9 years of closed cases. Meanwhile, the charges against Adrian disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. The judge who had authorized his release signed an order dismissing every accusation with prejudice. Marcus Reed's criminal case collapsed the same afternoon. The body camera footage proved the electronic modules had been planted before officers executed the search. The city immediately removed the closure notice from Reed Auto Garage. 3 days later, neighbors gathered outside as Marcus unlocked the front door again. The same customers who had watched police empty his shop returned carrying coffee, donuts, and homemade signs. One sign simply read, "Welcome back." Marcus laughed as he looked toward Adrian. You know, I always imagined reopening this place would feel different. Adrian smiled. It isn't about the garage. Marcus nodded. It's about not being afraid anymore. Across South Ridge, similar moments unfolded. Business owners who had spent years hiding white envelopes beneath cash registers began walking into the Federal Command Center, carrying boxes filled with receipts, journals, photographs, and payment records. Some apologized to Adrian. We should have believed you. Adrian shook every hand. You survived. That's nothing to apologize for. Naomi Carter was among the last to arrive. She carefully placed the final envelope onto Rachel Monroe's desk. I kept wondering whether saving these papers mattered. Rachel smiled warmly. They helped save an entire city. Tears filled Naomi's eyes. For years, I thought courage belonged to younger people. Rachel gently pushed the envelope back toward her. Well, courage belongs to anyone who chooses truth over fear. A week later, Officer Caleb Dunn received an unexpected phone call. He had spent several difficult days believing his law enforcement career was over forever. Instead, Rachel invited him to federal headquarters. There will be hearings, she explained. You'll testify? Caleb nodded. I will. You understand some people will call you a traitor. Caleb looked out the window before answering. My father lost everything because too many officers stayed silent. I'd rather lose a badge than lose my conscience. Rachel extended her hand. Then welcome to the Witness Protection Program. For the first time in years, Caleb smiled without carrying the weight of fear. 1 month later, Belhaven City Hall looked very different. Mayor Jonathan Hale stood before hundreds of residents during a public meeting broadcast live across the state. I failed this community, he admitted. I accepted reputation instead of demanding proof. He turned toward Adrian, who sat quietly among the audience. Mr. Cole, on behalf of this city, I'm sorry. The apology wasn't enough to erase years of damage, but it mattered. Because it was public. Because every resident heard it. The City Council unanimously approved the creation of an independent civilian oversight commission to review complaints against law enforcement. New evidence handling procedures were adopted. Every police interview room received tamper-proof recording systems based on technology developed by Cole Secure Systems. Ironically, the same technology Mercer had tried to destroy became the standard that prevented future corruption. Several months later, Cole Secure Systems officially reopened its South Ridge Community Security Center. The building was larger than before, brighter, filled with young technicians training local business owners to protect their own evidence. Near the entrance hung Adrian's old business license. The cracked frame had never been replaced. Visitors often asked why. Adrian always gave the same answer. Because I never want to forget what power looks like when it fears the truth. Beside the license stood another frame. Inside was a photograph of Elise smiling on the day the company first opened. Late that evening, after everyone had gone home, Adrian drove quietly to Greenwood Memorial Cemetery. He placed fresh white lilies beside her grave. We kept our promise, he said softly. The company survived. The community survived. And the truth survived. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. For the first time since this fight began, the silence felt peaceful. As Adrian walked back toward his truck, the lights of South Ridge glowed across the distance. Stores remained open after dark. Families walked the sidewalks without looking over their shoulders. Business owners no longer hid white envelopes beneath their registers. Fear had not disappeared completely, but it no longer ruled the neighborhood.
Sometimes justice doesn't arrive because the powerful suddenly become honest. Sometimes it arrives because one ordinary person refuses to let the truth disappear. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments and tell us what courage means to you. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, don't forget to subscribe for more journeys of hope, dignity, and justice.